The astral odyssey glided through the cursed nebula like a drunk weaving through traffic, slow and with the constant threat of smashing into something. Everyone knew about the bleak nebula. It was famous for its mind-scrambling effects, like the universe's least fun house of mirrors. Only the truly desperate or terminally stupid would pass through it. The crew of the Odyssey were both, apparently. Marin Voss stood at the helm of the classroom, if you could call a room held together by duct tape and wishful thinking a classroom. She was trying, unsuccessfully, to explain the concept of a simile to a group of alien teenagers who had all the enthusiasm of a corpse at a wake. So when I say you guys are like a herd of disinterested goats, that's not an insult. It's a simile, Marin said, gesturing wildly with her hands like that would somehow make them understand English better. One of the alien kids, HRRGAC, with skin the color of spoiled milk and a face like it lost a fight with a blender, raised a tentacle. Why would anyone compare us to goats? Goats are small and useless. Much like this lesson, Marin muttered under her breath. It's a figure of speech. Humans do it all the time. Like when I say this class is going to drive me to drink, I don't actually mean I'm going to start chugging moonshine right now. Though believe me, it's tempting. The ship shuddered violently. Lights flickered, and a deep groan echoed through the metal corridors as if the Odyssey itself had indigestion. Marin shot a glance at the ceiling. And there's the ship agreeing with me. Panic rippled through her students, who looked around with wide, bulbous eyes. Marin clapped her hands. Okay, calm down. You've all seen a ship malfunction before. This is nothing new, just the Odyssey having another existential crisis. But she knew better. Everyone did. Once you were in the bleak nebula, things went wrong in ways that defied logic and made you question all your life choices. Like why in the world Marin had taken up educating a bunch of aliens instead of, oh, I don't know, becoming a librarian on a nice, stable planet. Nothing ever exploded in libraries. As if on cue, the PA system crackled to life with a sound like a cat being strangled. Attention crew, came the voice of Captain Darius Mott, who had all the charisma of a wet sock. We're experiencing some unexpected phenomena. Please remain calm as we navigate through the bleak nebula. Unexpected phenomena, Marin repeated, shaking her head. That's one way to put it. You guys better hope the ship doesn't decide to turn inside out or start speaking in tongues. Arcal, another student with scales that looked like someone had painted a snake with leftover circus paint, raised a hand. Why did we travel through the bleak nebula if it's so dangerous? Because the captain's an idiot, Marin replied, without missing a beat. Well, technically, it's the quickest route to our destination. But mostly it's because he's an idiot. A loud bang echoed through the ship, followed by a series of smaller pops that sounded alarmingly like gunfire. Marin closed her eyes briefly, imagining herself back on Earth, sipping coffee that didn't taste like liquefied regret. The classroom door hissed open, and in strode first mate Jex, a towering figure with a perpetual grimace and an undisguised disdain for Marin's very existence. Voss, we've got a situation. Need you to keep the kids calm while we sort it out. Marin gave him a mock salute. Sir, yes, sir. I'll just pretend they are a bunch of oversized toddlers and distract them with shiny objects. Jex grunted, which was his version of a thank you, and left as quickly as he'd come. Marin turned back to her class, who were watching her with the kind of intensity usually reserved for car crashes or particularly juicy gossip. All right, everyone, new lesson plan. How to stay calm in a crisis. Step 1, don't panic, Marin said, trying to inject some confidence into her voice. It didn't work. The ship groaned again and the lights flickered ominously. The students didn't look convinced. Marin couldn't blame them. If the Odyssey had a face, it would be wearing the expression of someone who'd just accidentally swallowed a bee. Marin Voss, you are required on the bridge. The PA blared again, as if her day couldn't get any worse. Ah, duty calls, she said to her class, forcing a smile. Don't burn the place down while I'm gone. Marin walked through the dimly lit corridors, her footsteps echoing off the metal bulkheads. The ship seemed to sigh around her, a weary beast trudging through hostile territory. She couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy. They were both far from home, navigating through a chaos neither of them had signed up for. The bridge was a mess of screens flashing angry red warnings and crew members frantically pressing buttons as if that would somehow solve everything. The captain was in his chair, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Marin understood the feeling. Voss, we need you to talk to the students. Calm them down, Captain Mott said, running a hand through what little hair he had left. We've entered a sector where the nebula's effects are more pronounced, as in we might all die pronounced, or just weird things are going to happen pronounced. Marin quipped. Door number 2, for now, Mott replied, though his voice wavered slightly at the end. Marin nodded, suppressing the urge to point out that letting a nebula mess with your mind was probably not conducive to a long and healthy life. Instead, she turned on her heel, ready to head back to her students. As she left the bridge, another shudder rocked the ship. This time, it felt like a giant hand had grabbed the Odyssey and given it a good shake. Marin steadied herself against the wall, her heart skipping a beat. She could feel the tension in the air, like a rubber band stretched too far, just waiting to snap. Something wasn't right. But then again, when was anything ever right? Back at the classroom, Marin found her students huddled together, their earlier bravado crumbling like a house of cards. Even HRR Giak, who usually looked like he could take on a small army, seemed nervous. "All right, listen up," Marin called, clapping her hands again. "The bleak nebula's doing its thing, and it's our job to not make it worse by freaking out. Think of it like a really long, really weird roller coaster ride." HRR Giak looked at her, tentacles twitching. "Roller coaster? Yes, you know, one of those human inventions designed to make you scream and possibly vomit. Except we can't get off this one, so we just need to hang on and hope for the best," Marin explained. Arkal raised a scaly hand. "What if the ship breaks, then we improvise. And by improvise, I mean panic quietly and in an orderly fashion." A nervous chuckle rippled through the class, and Marin felt a tiny swell of triumph. Humor was the best medicine, or so she'd been told. They were all in the same sinking ship, quite literally, and it was her job to keep them from jumping overboard. As much as she wanted to give in to the creeping dread, Marin knew she had to keep it together. Another crash reverberated through the corridors, and the lights flickered again, this time turning an unsettling shade of green. Marin squinted, feeling like she was trapped in a malfunctioning nightclub. Suddenly, the ship's systems began speaking in tongues, spitting out streams of gibberish mixed with what sounded suspiciously like insults. Marin couldn't help but laugh. "See, even the ship's losing its mind," she said, gesturing to the ceiling, hoping to lighten the mood. But deep down, she felt a knot of fear tightening in her stomach. She gathered her students closer, trying to project an air of calm authority. "All right, here's the plan. We stick together, we keep our heads down, and we try not to let the nebula turn us into cosmic soup." The students nodded, though Marin could see the fear in their eyes. She couldn't blame them. The universe was a vast, uncaring place, and they were just tiny blips lost in its infinite expanse. But if they could make it through this, maybe there was hope, or at the very least, a good story to tell. "Okay, who wants to hear about the time I accidentally teleported an entire science lab into the principal's office?" she asked, and was greeted with a chorus of eager voices. As Marin launched into the tale, she tried to ignore the ominous creaks and groans of the ship around them. They were still in the nebula, still surrounded by chaos and uncertainty, but for now, at least, they had each other. And if there was one thing Marin had learned, it was that sometimes that was enough. Marin stood in front of her students, forcing a smile as the ship's metal walls groaned like an ancient beast waking from a nap it never wanted to take. The young Zephyrins sat in a semicircle, their wide eyes blinking in unison, as if synchronized confusion could somehow mend the ship's misgivings. "All right, kids," Marin began, trying to drown her own nervousness in sarcasm. "Today we're exploring the exciting world of behavioral oddities under extreme cosmic duress. Sound fun?" HRR Giak raised a tentacle, twitching with either eagerness or existential dread, hard to tell with these kids. "Is this like when the captain tries to sing in the mess hall?" "Worse," Marin replied, leaning on the wall that seemed slightly more stable than her current mental state. "At least his singing doesn't make you doubt the fabric of reality." Much, the class laughed, a sound that was part relief, part genuine amusement, though it quickly faded as the lights flickered again. Marin's eyes darted to the ceiling, half expecting it to collapse in a fit of pique, but the ship held for now. Marin sighed, glancing at the students. She'd noticed something off about them since they entered the nebula's inner regions. Arkal, usually as composed as a Zen monk on a sedative, was jittery, his scales rippling like a bad TV signal. "Everyone feeling okay?" Marin asked, trying to keep her tone light despite the weight of her growing suspicion. "It's weird," HRR Giak admitted, tentacles curling around each other in a nervous dance. "It feels like my thoughts are not just mine anymore." "Yeah, I get that," Marin said, suppressing a shiver. "It's like the nebula's reaching into your brain and rearranging your furniture while you're still sitting on it." It wasn't just the usual nebula-induced oddities. Something more insidious seemed to be at play, seeping into their minds like a bad smell that wouldn't go away. "Let's keep our heads all right," Marin said, unsure whether she was talking to them or herself. "Remember, panic is contagious, and trust me, we don't want that going viral." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room, but it was clear the tension was mounting. Marin needed to find out what was happening before the entire class decided to stage a mutiny, or worse, develop god complexes. The PA crackled to life again, sounding like a malfunctioning robot trying to tell a knock-knock joke. "All crew report any unusual activity immediately. Do not engage with any unknown entities." Captain Mott's voice droned, like he was reading off a list of ship regulations rather than facing a potentially deadly situation. "Unusual activity," Marin muttered, "because there's so much normal activity to compare it to out here. This wasn't just the nebula. Something was amplifying its effects." Marin's mind raced as she considered the possibilities. A rogue AI, some malevolent alien presence, or just someone with a really sick sense of humor. Miss Voss, Arkal's voice snapped her back to the present. Yes, Arkal, she asked, trying to keep her tone steady. Are we going to die? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marin paused, looking at the wide-eyed students who were waiting for her answer like it was the only thing keeping them tethered to sanity. Not if I have anything to say about it, she replied, her voice firm. And believe me, I've got plenty to say. She kept them occupied with exercises in rhetoric, nothing like a debate on the merits of interstellar trade to distract from impending doom. But the thought gnawed at her. Was the threat really just the nebula's chaos, or was it someone pulling the strings behind the scenes? As the class broke for a short recess, Marin took the opportunity to slip out and investigate. The corridors of the Odyssey were now tinged with that unsettling green glow, making her feel like she'd stepped into a low-budget sci-fi horror. The ship creaked ominously, a constant reminder that it was as trapped in this mess as the rest of them. She turned a corner and nearly collided with Jex, who was looking even more grim than usual. Voss, he grunted, his voice like gravel underfoot. You shouldn't be wandering around. Just stretching my legs, Marin lied, trying to gauge whether Jex was simply his usual unfriendly self or part of a bigger problem. Any word on what's going on? Just the nebula, Jex replied, but his eyes shifted, not meeting hers. Really? Marin pressed, crossing her arms, because it feels like more than just the nebula. Jex's frown deepened, if such a thing was possible. Keep the kids calm. Don't need them adding to the chaos. Sure thing, boss, Marin said, but she filed his evasiveness away, adding it to her growing pile of suspicions. As she made her way back to the classroom, she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was deliberately pushing them to the brink. And if the crew was in on it, she and her students might be the only ones not affected by whatever madness was afoot. Back in the classroom, the students had resumed their seats, chattering nervously. Marin clapped her hands, drawing their attention. All right, kiddos, let's get back to the riveting world of human history, shall we? Today's lesson, why humans thought war was a good idea. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. HRRGAC raised a tentacle. But humans won, didn't they? Depends on your definition of winning, Marin replied dryly. If by winning you mean barely surviving while everything around you burns, then yes, we won spectacularly. The students giggled, a sound that was more comforting than any safety protocols. But beneath the laughter lurked the same unease, as if they were all playing a part in a drama whose script had been lost. As Marin droned on about ancient Earth conflicts, her mind raced with possibilities. The more she thought about it, the more she was convinced that sabotage was a very real and very dangerous possibility. She needed proof, something that could convince the crew, or at least someone in a position of authority, that they were all in grave danger. The ship shuddered again, and for a moment, Marin felt as though the floor might drop out from under them. She steadied herself, glancing around at her students, who were clutching their desks like lifelines. All right, looks like the Odyssey wants to contribute to today's lesson, she quipped, trying to ignore the fear clawing at her insides. HRRGAC waved a tentacle again, more insistent this time. What if it's not just the nebula? What if someone's doing this? Marin paused, studying the young alien's face. Despite his gelatinous features, there was a sharp intelligence in his eyes. What makes you say that? It just feels wrong, HRRGAC said, his voice low. Like a song that's just a little off-key. Marin nodded slowly. You might be onto something, HRRGAC, but we need proof before we can do anything. But how? Arkal asked, scales shimmering with anxiety. First, we stay calm and keep our eyes open. We watch, we listen, and we don't jump to conclusions. Remember, paranoia is only useful if you've got something to back it up, Marin said. The students nodded, and Marin felt a flicker of hope. They weren't just kids, these were potential allies in whatever battle lay ahead. The PA crackled again, this time with a hiss that suggested the ship's speakers were contemplating rebellion. All crew, prepare for possible turbulence as we attempt to exit the nebula, Mott's voice droned. Turbulence, Marin muttered. As if we'd even notice. She resumed the lesson, but her mind was elsewhere, plotting their next move. This wasn't just about surviving the nebula anymore. It was about unraveling a mystery that might just save their lives. As the class continued, Marin found herself watching the students, noting the way they interacted, the subtle shifts in their demeanor. It was like they were all part of a puzzle, each piece critical to the whole. When the lesson ended, Marin dismissed the class but held HRRGAC and Arkal back. I need your help, she said, keeping her voice low. If there's sabotage happening, we need to be ready. What do you need us to do? HRRGAC asked, tentacles still for once. Keep your ears open. Listen to what the crew is saying, what they're not saying. Pay attention to anything unusual. And tell me if you notice anything at all. Arkal nodded, his eyes solemn. We'll help good, Marin said, feeling a spark of determination. We've got to stick together, all right. We're in this mess, like it or not. As they left, Marin felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just a teacher in a classroom held together by duct tape and stubbornness. She was part of something bigger, a fight against whatever darkness was closing in on them. The ship groaned again, a sound that seemed almost mournful as it echoed through the corridors. Marin squared her shoulders, determined to find the truth lurking in the shadows of the bleak nebula. Because if she'd learned anything, it was that sometimes the best way to win was simply to survive long enough to make winning possible. And with her students by her side, she was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The Astral Odyssey was having one of those days, the kind where everything that could go wrong did, and then a few unexpected extras for good measure. The ship's systems were acting like a toddler on a sugar high, lights flickering on and off, as if trying to communicate in Morse code. Doors occasionally refused to open or close too slowly, giving the impression they were downright offended by the mere thought of movement. Marin Voss stood at the front of her classroom, trying to maintain some semblance of authority amidst the chaos. Her students, a ragtag bunch of alien teenagers, looked about as comfortable as a cat at a dog show. The flashing lights painted the room in shades of panic and confusion, but Marin had no intention of letting a bit of electrical tantrum ruin her day. "All right, kids," Marin said, projecting a cheerfulness she definitely didn't feel. "Today we're going to talk about similes. It's like trying to explain colors to a species that sees in infrared. Impossible, but we're going to give it a try." Arcal, who was usually one of her more composed students, was jittery enough to be mistaken for a malfunctioning robot. His scales flickered with anxiety, making him look like a living disco ball. "Miss Voss, is the ship falling apart?" "Oh, only slightly," Marin replied with a dismissive wave. "Think of it as the ship's way of getting in touch with its inner drama queen." A snicker rippled through the room, easing the tension a fraction. It wasn't much, but it was something. HRGAC, with his tentacles curling in what Marin had come to recognize as unease, chimed in. "Feels like we're in the middle of a bad dream. Welcome to the bleak nebula," Marin said, "where your worst nightmares come with complimentary coffee and a side of existential dread." The PA system crackled to life, offering that signature chorus of static and discontent. "Attention all crew, we are experiencing minor technical difficulties. Please remain calm." "Minor," Marin murmured to herself, glancing up at the ceiling as if the ship could hear her sarcasm. "If this is minor, I'd hate to see major." The ship shuddered again, like an old man trying to get cozy in a too small bed. Marin sighed, watching as her students gripped their desks in a collective white-knuckle grip. "Think of it as a free roller coaster ride," she suggested with a grin that felt more like a grimace. "Except, without the safety regulations." The classroom door slid open with a reluctant hiss, and Jex stepped in, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Marin wasn't sure if his permanent scowl was due to the ship's current antics or just his usual disposition. "Voss," he grunted, as if her name was a burden on his tongue. "Captain wants you to keep the students in here. Less chance of them getting in the way." "Great," Marin replied, crossing her arms. Because nothing says safe like a room full of teenagers hyped on fear and adrenaline. Jex's face didn't so much as twitch. "Just keep them here." As he left, Marin turned back to her students, who were watching her like she held the keys to salvation, or at least the nearest escape pod. "Okay, team, let's focus. Arcal, tell us a simile." Arcal blinked, his scales shifting to a slightly calmer hue. Like a fish out of water." "Perfect," Marin said, giving him a nod of approval. "Which, incidentally, is how this whole situation feels right now." The class chuckled, a sound that was starting to feel like a lifeline in the midst of chaos. Marin knew she had to keep their spirits up, had to keep them from slipping into the kind of hopelessness that the bleak nebula seemed to encourage. "All right, HRGAC, your turn," she prompted, hoping to keep their minds off the groaning ship. HRGAC's tentacles twitched thoughtfully, like a nebula swallowing thoughts. Marin gave him a mock-serious nod. "Deep, HRGAC, very deep. I think you just summed up our whole field trip." The PA crackled again, this time with the captain's voice sounding more like an annoyed parent than a leader of interstellar travel. "All crew, please report any suspicious activity." "We're working on getting systems back online." "Suspicious activity," Marin repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Apparently someone skipped the part where living in a perpetual state of weird is normal out here." She resumed the lesson, though it was less about education and more about distraction. Her mind raced through possibilities: sabotage, malfunction, or simply the nebula's mind games. And how much longer could they keep this up before someone, perhaps herself, finally snapped? The ship groaned again, and Marin swore it was starting to pick up a rhythm. Maybe it was working on a musical number. The thought was almost comforting in its absurdity. "Miss Voss," Arcal interrupted her musing. "What's going to happen if the ship doesn't get fixed?" Marin hesitated, knowing the truth sounded more like a horror story than reassurance. "We'll be fine," she said, forcing a smile. "Think of it as a challenge. Humans love challenges. We're stubborn like that." HRRGAC raised a tentacle curiosity in his eyes. Is that why you always try to outsmart each other? Marin chuckled. Oh, it's less about outsmarting and more about proving we're the smartest. It's a competitive thing, like a sport but with more insults. The classroom door slid open again, and this time it was Captain Mott himself. He looked harried, his usual composed demeanor replaced with something resembling exasperation. Voss, he said, like it was a greeting and a curse rolled into one. Captain Marin replied, her tone light but her eyes serious. We holding up, barely, Mott admitted, looking around the classroom as if seeing it for the first time. We're trying to get systems stable, but the Nebula's playing hell with everything. Sounds about right, Marin said, nodding. Anything we can do to help, or should we just continue to make sarcastic commentary from the sidelines? Mott's lips twitched, and Marin thought she caught a hint of amusement. Keep the kids here, keep them calm. If things get worse, we'll need you ready to move. Got it, Marin said, watching as he left. The door closed behind him with an ominous thud, like the punctuation to a very dark joke. She turned back to her students, who were watching her with a mix of fear and faith. Okay, gang, we're in this together. So let's keep learning, keep our minds sharp, and remember, no one panics on my watch. The students nodded, their faces a mix of determination and dread. It wasn't much, but it was enough. They might be trapped in a ship on the verge of a nervous breakdown, but they were trapped together. As the lesson continued, Marin felt a strange sense of camaraderie growing between her and her students. They weren't just kids anymore. They were allies in a battle against an enemy they couldn't see, fighting with humor and wit against the madness creeping through the ship. The lights flickered again, and Marin glanced up, wondering if the ship was trying to signal something important or just enjoying its own chaos. Either way, she knew they had to stay alert, stay ready for whatever came next. All right, last simile of the day, Marin said, drawing their attention back to her. This one's a group effort. Finish the sentence. Life in the bleak nebula is like. Arkal started, his voice hesitant, like a bad trip through a haunted house, like a song sung by a drunk bard. HRRGAC added, his tentacles waving for emphasis. Marin grinned, the tension in the room easing for a moment. Perfect. See, we're writing our own story here, and trust me, we're going to make it a good one. The ship shuddered again, the lights dimming momentarily before flaring back to life. Marin took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever came next. They might be on a malfunctioning ship in the middle of a mind-bending nebula, but they had each other, and that was a start. As the lesson wrapped up, Marin watched her students file out for break, their laughter echoing down the corridor. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind her why she was here, why she kept fighting. Because in the end, sometimes the best way to win wasn't to conquer but to endure, and she was determined to see them all through this madness, come what may. With a final glance at the flickering lights, Marin squared her shoulders and headed out to rejoin her students, ready to face whatever the bleak nebula threw at them next. Marin Voss couldn't shake the feeling that the ship was on the verge of a major existential crisis, and frankly, she could relate. In the middle of the bleak nebula, her classroom, an insulated metal box with all the charm of prison cell, was somehow the most stable place on the astral odyssey. Not that stable meant much when the lights flickered like they were practicing Morse code for help, and the floor had taken on an unsettling wobble. As the students filed back in, she noted the change in their demeanor. They wore rebellion on their sleeves like a new fashion trend, casting sideways glances at the ceiling and muttering among themselves. Marin could feel it, a storm brewing. She'd seen it enough times to recognize the signs, the sideways glances, the whispers, the palpable tension of a group on the brink of turning opinion into action. All right, everyone, settle in. Next on our agenda, she started, but Arkal interrupted with the kind of gusto that only an anxious teenager could muster. Why are we even here? He blurted, his scales flashing a defiant red. Existential questions are best saved for philosophy class, Arkal, Marin replied dryly, though she knew it wouldn't be enough to quell the brewing mutiny. We're here because someone in the administration thought a trip through the bleak nebula was a good idea. Possibly while drunk, the ship creaked ominously, as if agreeing with her assessment. HRRGAC, ever the opportunist, seized the moment. It doesn't seem like the crew knows what they're doing. Marin leaned back against her desk, crossing her arms. Welcome to adulthood, where the people in charge are often just as clueless as the rest of us but get paid more for the privilege. You'll get used to it. Her attempt at humor was met with a few strained laughs, but the undercurrent of rebellion was still there, simmering just beneath the surface. Marin knew she needed to steer the conversation before it boiled over. But seriously, she continued, her tone softening just a tad. I get it. You're scared. I'm supposed to be guiding you through this chaotic mess, and here we are, lost in a nebula that loves playing mind games with its visitors. So let's focus on what we can do, not on what we can't. Arkal wasn't convinced. And what can we do besides complete this lesson? Marin shrugged. We stay calm, we think, and if necessary, we make smart decisions. Everyone in this room has a brain, use it. And remember, panic never solved anything. She could feel their eyes on her, weighing her words. For a moment, the grumbling quieted, though the tension lingered like a bad smell. The PA system crackled back to life, spewing static and the captain's voice like a parent trying not to yell at a child after a long day. Attention all crew, we've had a critical system failure. All non-essential personnel should remain in their quarters until further notice. Critical system failure, Marin repeated with a dramatic sigh. You hear that, kids? We've officially been promoted to essential personnel. Congratulations. I'd make a speech, but I left my notes in my other pants. The students exchanged looks, somewhere between disbelief and a suppressed laugh. They were scared, but they were still teenagers, and teenagers had a remarkable ability to find humor in even the most dire situations. It was a survival mechanism Marin admired, even if it sometimes bordered on irritating. Miss Voss HRRGAC said, his tentacles twisting like anxious fingers. What if the ship decides it wants to be a star instead and combusts? Marin finished for him. Then we have a spectacular view of our last moments, but until then, full speed ahead. Or at least as much speed as this bucket of bolts can muster. The door slid open again with an all-too-familiar hiss, and this time it was crewman Jex, looking like he'd rather be doing anything else than playing messenger. His scowl had deepened into something that could etch glass. Voss, we need you, he said, the words clipped like a bad haircut. Systems are going haywire. Marin pushed off her desk, her mind racing through a million scenarios, none of which ended with her sipping a martini on a beach. Everyone stay put. Remember, the only thing worse than being stuck here is wandering a ship with a bad attitude. Before she left, she met the eyes of each student in turn, letting them know they weren't alone, even if the ship was doing a fine impression of a haunted house. Back in a jiffy, and keep the mutiny to a dull roar. Yeah, Jex led her through the warren of corridors, the ship shuddering beneath their feet like a jittery old dog. Marin could hear the distant murmur of crew members arguing, the occasional curse punctuating the air like gunfire. Any idea what's gone wrong? Marin asked, breaking the silence between them. He shot her a sideways glance. Nebula's screwing with the system. Everything's out of sync. It's like trying to surf a black hole. Sounds like a blast, she said, trying and failing to suppress a grin. And here I thought teaching teenagers was a challenge. They reached the bridge, a space that was usually the epitome of calm efficiency, but now looked like a particularly tense family reunion. Captain Mott was at the center, barking orders with the enthusiasm of someone herding particularly unruly cats. Voss, he acknowledged her presence with a nod that did little to hide his exasperation. We're losing environmental control. Need someone to help manage the kids in case we have to move them. Great, because I clearly didn't have enough on my plate. Throw in an apocalypse and it's a party. Marin scanned the chaotic room, taking in the crew's frantic attempts to regain control over a ship that seemed determined to rebel against its masters. Can we get the environmentals back online? She asked, slipping into the practical mindset that had served her well in countless parent-teacher conferences. Mott shook his head, frustration etched into every line of his face. Not without a miracle. Marin glanced at the flickering displays, each more nonsensical than the last. Guess we'll have to make do without one. All right, give me something to do, or someone to shout at. Mott gestured to a console, its screen a jumble of error messages and static. Try to get the auxiliary systems online. We need power to the lower decks. Marin frowned, eyeing the console with suspicion. You realize I'm a teacher, not an engineer, right? Just do your best, he said, turning back to the chaos with the air of a man juggling chainsaws. Marin approached the console, her fingers hovering uncertainly over the keys. She hadn't felt this out of her depth since her first year teaching, when a kid had asked her if she believed in aliens, and she'd accidentally launched into a rant about tax evasion. All right, you stupid machine, she muttered under her breath. Let's see if you can be reasoned with. To her surprise, the interface seemed to respond to her fumbling attempts, flickering in and out of consciousness like a drunk trying to remember their address. She worked quickly, her mind racing as she juggled the demands of her dual roles, teacher and reluctant crisis manager. The ship groaned again, the sound echoing through the bridge like the wail of a distressed banshee. It was a sound that spoke of imminent disaster, of the kind of catastrophe that would make a great cautionary tale. Miss Voss, HRRGAC's voice crackled through the comms system, his urgency cutting through the noise. We need you back here. Arcal's freaking out. Marin swore under her breath, glancing at Mott. I need to get back. Teenage rebellion waits for no one. He nodded, the weariness in his eyes mirrored by the slump of his shoulders. Go, we'll manage. As Marin made her way back to the classroom, the ship continued its erratic dance, each shudder a reminder of their precarious position. She wondered, not for the first time, if they'd all signed up for the wrong kind of adventure. When she entered the classroom, it was to find Arcal pacing like a caged animal, his scales a kaleidoscope of stress. The rest of the students watched him with the kind of morbid fascination usually reserved for slow-motion train wrecks. Arcal Marin said, using her best teacher voice, the one that could stop a food fight at 20 paces, "Talk to me." He rounded on her, his eyes wild. "This is insane. We're all gonna die out here." Marin put her hands on her hips, channeling every ounce of calm she didn't feel. "If I've learned one thing in life, it's that panicking only makes you look stupid. And believe me, you don't want to be the one looking stupid when the universe is watching." Her attempt at humor fell flat, but it was enough to pull Arcal back from the edge. He stopped pacing, his breaths coming in ragged gasps as he tried to regain control. "Look," Marin continued, her tone softening. "I know this is scary, but we're in this together, and I'm not about to let some uppity Nebula get the better of us." "All right," he nodded, his scales settling into a more subdued hue. The rest of the class seemed to relax a fraction, and Marin felt the relief wash over her like a cool breeze. "Good, now let's focus on what we can do," Marin said, clapping her hands together. "If we're stuck here, we might as well make it productive. Who knows, maybe we'll get a story out of it to bore your kids with one day." Despite everything, a ripple of laughter spread through the room, breaking the tension just enough to let Marin breathe. And as she led them through exercises designed more to distract than educate, Marin realized that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't so out of her depth after all. They might be adrift in a nebula with a penchant for mental games, but they had humor, they had each other, and most importantly, they had hope. Not much, but enough to keep them fighting. And in the bleak nebula, that was all they could ask for. Marin Voss had never been one for existential dread. She preferred the more tangible anxieties, like an overdrawn bank account or the prospect of parent-teacher night. But standing in the middle of the astral odyssey as it teetered on the brink of disaster, she realized just how overrated peace of mind was. The ship groaned in its death throes, the kind of noise that could make a grown man weep or drink, or both. Lights flickered like half-dead fireflies, and the PA system crackled as if it were clearing its throat to deliver yet another piece of bad news. Marin found herself yearning for the simplicity of an algebra problem. "Miss Voss," came a voice that was more whine than inquiry. It was HRR Giac, his tentacles performing a nervous soft shoe dance. "Are we gonna make it?" Marin looked at him, then at the rest of the class, each face a canvas of youthful dread. "Of course we'll make it. We've got too much paperwork to die today." Arcal snorted, his scales shifting from a panicked red to a slightly less panicked orange. "Like the universe cares about paperwork. Well, if it doesn't, then it should. I'll have words with management when we get back." She tried to sound more confident than she felt, her voice carrying the bravado of someone who had nothing to lose except her last nerve. They were in the classroom, which now felt more like a holding cell with the ship systems on the fritz. Marin's attempt at calming the students with her usual brand of gallows humor had worked for a time, but the shadows of reality had a way of creeping back in. "All right, crew," Marin clapped her hands, drawing attention back to her. "When I was a kid, we had these things called fire drills. Consider this a cosmic version. We stay calm, we huddle together, and we wait for Captain Mott to unfuck this situation." In response, the PA sputtered to life, droning static in the captain's voice like an old man trying to read without his glasses. "All personnel, brace for..." It cut off with a whine that made Marin's teeth itch. "Brace for what?" A student yelped, panic edging their voice. Marin rolled her eyes. "Brace for impact, existential crisis, impromptu karaoke, who knows, pick your poison." Just then the door slid open with a reluctant hiss, and in walked Jex looking like he'd just taken a stroll through hell and back. "Voss," he said, voice clipped, "Captain needs you on the bridge." "Things are getting ugly." "Define ugly," Marin replied, already knowing the answer but feeling obligated to ask. "Systems are failing left and right. It's a miracle we haven't been spaced yet." Charming, she deadpanned. "Kids, stay put. If the lights go out, tell ghost stories. If they don't, make up some new ones." As she followed Jex down the corridor, the ship shuddered beneath them, a not-so-gentle reminder of their precarious situation. She could hear the distant clamor of crew members, voices rising like a badly organized choir. "Jex," Marin said, trying to keep her tone casual, "you ever think we'd end up like this?" "Only every day since I signed up for this gig," he replied with a grim smile. "But it pays the bills. Bills won't matter if we're atomized." "True, but I might finally win an argument with my wife." They reached the bridge, the chaos ratcheted up to a boiling point. Captain Mott stood at the center, looking like a statue of stress. His crew scurried around him, each member wearing the same expression of grim determination that one might find in a particularly competitive game of poker. Mott, Marin called, announcing her arrival. "Voss, good. We need to brace for emergency protocols. Environmental controls are failing, and if we don't fix it, we won't be able to breathe, let alone live." "Great," Marin muttered. "I didn't like oxygen anyway. Too mainstream. help the crew divert power to essential systems, Mott instructed as though she were some kind of makeshift engineer. We need all the hands we can get. Fine, Marin sighed, moving to a console that looked more like a sadist's idea of fun than a piece of technology. She tapped at keys with the blind optimism of someone scratching off a lottery ticket. The screen flickered, displaying data that might as well have been hieroglyphics. She glanced at the engineer next to her, a man named Riv, who had the look of someone contemplating the merits of a career change. "Any chance I can get an instruction manual?" Marin asked, half joking. He shrugged, a gesture that managed to communicate both hopelessness and camaraderie. "Best advice, press buttons until something breaks or fixes. Story of my life," Marin said, jabbing at the console with renewed vigor. If she was going down, she'd at least go down pressing buttons. On the screen, lines of code danced erratically, shifting in and out of coherence. She tried to find a pattern, a rhythm to the madness. Somewhere, a system beeped as if mocking her efforts. "Hey, Riv," she said, not taking her eyes off the screen. "You ever wonder if the universe is just one big practical joke every damn day?" Riv replied, pulling on a lever with the desperation of a man who knew it wouldn't do squat. "I'm just hoping the punchline isn't fatal." "I'll drink to that," she said, though in truth, she couldn't remember the last time she'd had something stronger than recycled space coffee. As the minutes ticked by, the bridge remained a hive of frantic activity. Marin's hands moved quickly over the console, trying to divert power away from failing systems to those that might keep them alive. Each decision felt like a gamble, like betting on a three-legged horse in a storm. The ship shuddered again, groaning like an old man with a bad knee. It was a sound that reverberated through the bones, a reminder that death might be one system's failure away. Mott's voice cut through the chaos, a beacon in the storm. "We need control over navigation, now I'm trying." Marin snapped, pounding the console with her fist for emphasis. It beeped angrily at her, but she didn't care. "You give me a toaster, I can make toast. You give me this, keep at it," he ordered, turning back to his own futile attempts to wrestle the ship into submission. With a resigned sigh, Marin refocused on her task. The code on the screen blurred into a mess of symbols, each more nonsensical than the last. But she couldn't stop, not while there was still a chance. "Miss Voss, come in." The comm crackled to life, HRRGAC's voice echoing through the static. Marin paused, wiping sweat from her brow. "HRRGAC, this better be important." There was a hesitation, a crackle of uncertainty before he spoke again. "The class, we're worried. We can hear the ship. It sounds bad." Marin closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of their situation press down on her. When she spoke, her voice was steady, confident. "It's nothing we can't handle. Just keep doing what you're doing." "Okay, all right," HRRGAC replied, though he sounded far from convinced. She turned back to the console, determination hardening her resolve. The ship might be falling apart, but she'd be damned if she let it take them down without a fight. In the midst of her efforts, a sudden calm descended on the bridge. The crew paused, eyes flicking towards the main display, where a new message scrolled across the screen. "Power restored to navigation." Riv read aloud, disbelief coloring his voice. "We've got control." A cheer rose up from the crew, a small victory in the face of overwhelming odds. Marin felt a flicker of hope, a brief respite from the constant barrage of despair. "Nice work, Voss," Mott said, offering her a nod of approval. "Don't thank me yet," she replied, rubbing her stiff neck. "We're not out of the woods, true, but at least now we've got a map." With newfound determination, Marin continued her work, her fingers dancing over the keys in a rhythm that was both frantic and methodical. As the system slowly came back online, she could almost believe in miracles. Almost. But in the back of her mind, doubt lingered, a shadow that refused to be banished. The ship was still fragile, still teetering on the brink, and as much as she wanted to believe in a happy ending, she knew better than to trust in fairy tales. They'd bought themselves time, but at what cost? The ship was damaged, the crew exhausted, and the students were one panic attack away from mutiny. Marin pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. They hadn't come this far to give up now, not when the stakes were this high. She'd fight for them, for the crew, for the students, for the ship. And if the universe wanted a punchline, it would have to wait, because Marin Voss wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The classroom felt like a pressure cooker, and Marin was the only lid holding the chaos back. The ship rattled again, a tremor running through the hull like a bad omen. She could almost hear the universe laughing at their predicament, and it had the kind of laugh that made you want to punch it in the face. "I could really use a drink right now," she muttered to herself, though Riv, next to her, overheard. "Make it a double and I'm in," he said with a wink, his fingers dancing over his console like he was playing a particularly unforgiving piano piece. "Sure, but it's on you," she shot back. "I'm saving my credits for therapist after this. Therapist with a side hustle as a miracle worker, I hope." The comm crackled again, this time with a low, conspiratorial whisper that sent chills down Marin's spine. Miss Voss, HRRGAC's voice filtered through. We think we found something. Unless it's an escape pod, kid, I'm not interested, Marin replied, trying to keep her tone light despite the sinking feeling in her stomach. No, really, HRRGAC insisted. Arcal found a data chip in one of the air vents. It's got some kind of message on it. Marin paused, her fingers hovering over the console as she considered the implications. A message in the vents was about as suspicious as a politician's promise. All right, sit tight. I'm coming down. She glanced over at Mott, who was busy looking like he'd just discovered his retirement savings had been invested in Beanie Babies. Captain, I've got to check on the kids. They might have something. Do it, he grunted without looking her way, as if the weight of the galaxy was pressing down on his shoulders. It probably was, in a metaphorical sense. Marin made her way back through the flickering corridors, the ship groaning around her like an aging rock star. By the time she reached the classroom, she was half expecting the kids to have started a cult to worship the PA system as some kind of fickle deity. Instead, she found them huddled around a makeshift projector, the kind that looked like it was held together by hope and duct tape. Arcal, scales shifting nervously between hues, was fiddling with a data chip in a way that suggested he'd never seen one outside a textbook. All right, what have you got? Marin asked, more intrigued than she'd admit. Arcal's scales shifted to an embarrassed pink. I think this might be important. Well, unless it's a recipe for space cookies, let's see it. Marin folded her arms, trying to project an aura of authority while resisting the urge to check the exits for potential escape routes. Arcal inserted the chip, and the projector whirred to life, casting a hologram into the air. The image was fuzzy at first, but slowly resolved into something that made Marin's heart skip a beat. It was a transmission log, dated just before their departure. The message was short and to the point, the kind of thing that made you wonder just how deep the rabbit hole went. Ensure the ship passes through the nebula, a voice crackled, low and conspiratorial. The chaos will cover our tracks while we extract the target. No one can know, Marin blinked, her mind racing. Target, she repeated, more to herself than anyone else. HRRGAC's tentacles twitched nervously. What does it mean, Miss Voss? It means, Marin said, her voice steady. Someone's using us as pawns. The students exchanged glances, the undercurrent of fear palpable. Marin could almost see their thoughts, each one a thread in a tangled web of conspiracy and danger. The universe had a sick sense of humor, and they were its punchline. All right, listen up, Marin said, drawing their attention. We've got a mystery on our hands, and it's up to us to solve it. Us? Arcal asked, his scales flickering between disbelief and anxiety. Unless you've got a superhero cape I don't know about, yeah, us. Marin's tone was dry, but there was an edge of determination beneath it. The kind of determination that made you want to fight back even when the odds were stacked against you. But how? HRRGAC interjected, his tentacles wrapping around themselves in a nervous tangle. We need to find out who's behind this and why, Marin replied, her mind already whirring with possibilities. And the only way to do that is to dig deeper. The students looked at each other, their expressions a mix of trepidation and excitement. It was a gamble, but one they were willing to take. After all, it wasn't every day you got to play detective in deep space. All right, Marin continued, glancing at the projector. First, we need to secure this. Hide it somewhere no one will think to look. Arcal's scales shimmered with resolve. I've got a spot, he said, his voice firm. Good, Marin nodded. Then we need to gather more evidence. Anyone who might know about this, anything out of the ordinary, report it to me. What if they find out? HRRGAC asked, his voice a whisper. Then we play dumb, Marin replied with a wry smile. And trust me, I'm an expert. The class chuckled, the tension in the room easing just a fraction. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. Enough to give them hope that maybe, just maybe, they could turn the tide. All right, team, Marin said, her voice full of a confidence she didn't fully feel. Let's show the universe we're not just along for the ride. As the students dispersed, exchanging whispers and plans, Marin felt a flicker of something she hadn't in a long time, purpose. For the first time since this nightmare began, she had a direction, even if that direction was likely to lead them deeper into the heart of danger. The universe might be laughing, but she'd be damned if she didn't have the last laugh. With the students occupied, Marin returned to the bridge, her mind a whirlwind. The ship's systems were still shaky, but for the first time she felt like they had a fighting chance. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had before. Mott eyed her as she approached, his expression inscrutable. Voss, what did you find? Trouble, she replied, her tone serious but with that ever-present edge of sarcasm. The kind we don't need, explain. Sabotage, she said, and the word hung in the air like a bad smell. Someone's using us as cover for something bigger. Mott's eyes narrowed. You have proof enough to make me uneasy, Marin said, not backing down. We need to be careful, careful. Mott's laugh was humorless. In case you haven't noticed, we're on the verge of falling apart. Exactly, Marin replied sharply. We've got to hold it together long enough to stop this. The bridge was quiet, the crew focused on their tasks, but Marin could feel their unease. They were caught in the web just like her, and they all knew it. All right, Mott said finally, his voice low. But whatever you're planning, make it fast. We might not have much time. Fast is my specialty, Marin shot back, already turning to leave. And as she walked away, she couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they had a shot. It was a slim one, but it was theirs. Back in the classroom, the atmosphere was tense but focused. The students were scattered, searching for clues, anything that might help them unravel the mystery. It was like a bad detective movie, only in space and with much higher stakes. Marin joined them, her mind racing as she considered their next steps. The nebula was a wild card, but it also provided cover. If they could use it to their advantage, they might have a chance of turning the tables. Miss Voss, HRRGAC called, waving her over. We found something. She hurried over, her heart pounding in her chest. What is it? It's a list, Arcal said, holding up a piece of paper that looked like it had been crumpled, uncrumpled, and crumpled again for good measure. Names and dates all linked to the nebula. Marin scanned it quickly, her mind racing. It was a list of personnel, assignments, and rotations. On its own, it meant little, but in light of what they'd discovered, it was damning. This is it, she said, her voice low but full of conviction. This is what we need. The students exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of anxiety and determination. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. All right, here's the plan, Marin said, gathering them around. We're going to expose the saboteurs, and we're going to do it publicly. If we can get this information to the right people, we might just have a chance. How? Arcal asked, his scales shifting to a nervous green. Leave that to me, Marin replied, her mind already working through the possibilities. But first, we need to secure the bridge. The bridge, HRRGAC repeated, his tentacles curling in on themselves. Yes, Marin said with a grim smile. We're going to need it if we want to make this work. The students nodded, their resolve hardening. They had a mission now, and they weren't going to back down. As they moved to execute their plan, Marin couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. It was fragile like a candle in a storm, but it was there. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she believed they might just come through this in one piece. The universe might have had other plans, but Marin had a few tricks up her sleeve. They were going to fight, and they were going to win, because when it came down to it, they were all they had, and sometimes that was enough. Marin stood at the bridge entrance, a motley crew of misfit students clustered behind her. She glanced at them, each looking as ready for a coup as a bunch of pimple-faced amateurs might be, which is to say not very, but they had spirit, albeit the kind that could get them all killed in this cosmic slapstick. All right, team, Marin whispered, remember the plan. Cause a distraction, secure the bridge, expose the saboteurs. Easy peasy, Arcal, his scales a nervous chartreuse, nodded with the enthusiasm of someone who'd just been told to jump off a cliff. Yes, easy, he muttered, shifting awkwardly. Marin caught his eye and raised an eyebrow. What, you thought this would be like an extracurricular club? How to overthrow a spaceship 101. Riv, who'd joined the group after finally prying himself away from whatever half-functional console he'd been pretending to work at, chuckled. Hell, I'd sign up for that. Beats my usual Tuesday nights. Focus, Marin snapped, though she couldn't help but smirk. We've got one shot at this. Let's make it count. HRRGAC, all tentacles and jittery energy, raised one of his appendages. What if this doesn't work? Then we die heroic deaths, kids, Marin deadpanned. But not today if I can help it. Now, Riv, you're on distraction duty. Riv grinned, rubbing his hands together. I've got just the thing, he said, pulling out a small, black device from his pocket. Strobe emitter. Should give the bridge crew a nice little light show. Marin nodded. Perfect. Once the lights are dancing, we move in and secure the place. With a final nod, she motioned for them to take their positions. Riv went first, slipping ahead to the panel outside the bridge. He inserted the device, twisting it just so, and the corridors erupted into a disco of epileptic proportions. The lights flickered violently, spinning in and out of focus, making the ship seem like it was trying to have a rave and an existential crisis at the same time. The bridge crew, predictably, descended into chaos. Mott's voice could be heard barking orders, though he might as well have been trying to organize a herd of cats on caffeine. Now, Marin hissed and they surged forward, bursting into the bridge like a particularly ambitious field trip. The crew gawked at them, too astonished to react. Marin took advantage of their stupefaction. Listen up, she shouted, her voice slicing through the confusion like a well-aimed blade. We're taking over. Sit tight and nobody gets hurt. Are you out of your mind? Mott sputtered, trying to regain control. But with the light still going haywire and half his crew too busy shielding their eyes to think straight, his words were about as effective as a wet paper towel in a blaster fight. Marin gestured for the students to fan out. Arcal and HRRGAC moved to the consoles, while Riv casually leaned against a panel, looking as nonchalant as a man who'd just started a mutiny could. Anyone want to tell me why the hell we're staging a kindergarten coup? Mott demanded, his expression a mixture of disbelief and outrage. Marin shot him a look. Because someone's sabotaging us and you're too busy singing in the mess hall to notice. Mott opened his mouth to retort, but Marin continued, her words rapid fire. We found a transmission log, Captain. Orders to ensure the ship passes through the nebula. Someone's using us as cover for something big. Sounds like conspiracy nuts talk, Mott grumbled, but doubt flickered in his eyes. Is it? Marin challenged, pulling out the list they'd found, slapping it down on the navigation table. Personnel rotations, all linked to the nebula. You think that's a coincidence? The bridge fell silent, the crew fumbling for any semblance of composure. Marin could almost taste the tension, a coppery tang that made her heart hammer in her chest. Mott peered at the list, suspicion battling with realization. This doesn't make any sense, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Welcome to the club, Riv said dryly. We've got jackets. Marin glanced at HRR who was frantically tapping away at a console, tentacles flying. HRR you got anything? I'm trying, Miss Voss, he replied, a bead of sweat, or whatever the alien equivalent was trickling down his appendages. It's a mess in here. Files cross-referenced with gibberish corrupted data, like someone's been using the ship systems as a personal sandbox. Fantastic, Marin muttered, rubbing her temples. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack that's on fire. Arkal looked up from his console, his scales shifting to a determined gold. Wait, I might have something, he said, his voice tight with concentration. There's a secure channel here encrypted, but it's weak. It looks like it's bypassing standard protocols. Marin nodded, feeling a surge of hope. Can you break it? Arkal grinned, a rare sight that made him look less like he was about to faint. Yes, I think I can. As Arkal worked, Marin turned back to Mott, who seemed to be grappling with the enormity of what was happening. We're going to get to the bottom of this, Captain, but we need your help. Mott hesitated, glancing at his crew. They were watching him, waiting for his decision, their faith hanging by a thread. Finally, he nodded, conceding. All right, he murmured, I'm with you. Let's find out who's pulling the strings. Marin's stomach unclenched a fraction. Good, now let's. Arkal's console beeped, cutting her off. He looked up, eyes wide. I'm in. The bridge collectively leaned forward as a distorted audio file crackled to life, filling the air with static and stuttering voices. Repeat, secure extraction of the target. Ensure chaos persists. No interference tolerated. End transmission. Marin felt a chill run down her spine. There it was, the smoking gun they needed. Proof that someone wanted them tangled in the nebula's grasp, blind to whatever scheme was unfolding. Extraction of the target, she repeated softly, the words tasting like ash. But what's the target? HRRG's console beeped, and he let out a small, triumphant noise. I think I found something, he said, gesturing Marin over. On the screen was a map of the bleak nebula with a single, pulsing dot marked target. It was deep in the nebula where no sane person would venture willingly. That's it, Marin said, a mix of dread and resolve settling over her. That's what they are after. But what is it? Arkal asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. Marin shook her head, the enormity of their situation sinking in. I don't know, she admitted, but we're going to find out. She turned to the crew, all eyes on her. We've got to get to that location, find out what's so important that someone would risk everything to get it. This is insane, Mott said, though his voice lacked conviction. We don't know what's out there. We don't, Marin agreed, but we can't just sit here and wait for whatever's coming. We need answers. The bridge quieted, the weight of the decision pressing down on them all. Then one by one the crew nodded, resolve hardening in their eyes. Marin felt a spark of something she hadn't in a long time, hope. They were hurtling toward who knows what, but they were doing it together. All right, she said, taking a deep breath. Let's move out. The crew scrambled into action, setting coordinates and adjusting systems with newfound vigor. Marin stood at the center of the storm, guiding them with a surety she didn't fully feel. As the astral odyssey veered into the heart of the nebula, Marin couldn't help but think about the absurdity of it all. A teacher, a bunch of kids, and a half-mad captain, all trying to save a ship that felt like it was held together by duct tape and prayers. The universe might have been laughing, but they were still in the game. And that counted for something. As they plunged into the swirling chaos of the nebula, Marin hoped their gamble would pay off. And if not, well, at least they'd go down fighting, because in the end, that was all any of them could do. The astral odyssey continued its perilous trek through the bleak nebula, and Marin Voss found herself leading a ragtag crew of students and a half-mad captain through the kind of existential crisis usually reserved for punchlines about lost travelers. Just another day in the vacuum of space. All right, folks, let's not celebrate too soon, Marin said, trying to inject some levity into the tense atmosphere of the bridge. We might have stopped the ship from imploding, but we're still one step away from being space debris. Yeah, the only thing standing between us and the void is pure dumb luck, Riv added with a wink, his voice dripping with sarcasm that Marin couldn't help but admire. Mott, the captain who had somehow found himself demoted from singing in the mess hall to following a teacher's lead, looked around with a glazed expression. Can't say I imagined ending up here when I took the job. Thought it'd be more about star charts and less about mutinies. Welcome to adulthood, Marin said with a wry smile. Just a series of escalating responsibilities you never signed up for. Arcal, the chartreuse-scaled student who had found his courage somewhere between defying authority and deciphering encrypted transmissions, nodded. I'd say we've learned more today than in any class. HRR the tentacled bundle of nerves who'd somehow become the ship's most reliable technician, was busy at his console. Got to say, Miss Voss, I like this curriculum better, he said, his appendages jittering as he rerouted power to keep the ship stable. Less homework, more heart-stopping danger, Marin quipped, raising an eyebrow. I'll put that in the suggestion box. The bridge crew, once a collection of misfits holding onto their sanity with both hands, was now working together with the kind of synergy only found in desperate situations. The PA system crackled, as if reminding them not to get too comfortable. We're entering calmer parts of the nebula, Mott announced, his voice tinged with surprise. He seemed almost reluctant to accept the relief that washed over the crew. Finally, Riv said, leaning back against his console with a sigh, I was beginning to think this nebula was some cosmic joke. Like, how many light years does it take to get out of an existential crisis? That's the thing about space, Marin said, her tone dry. It doesn't care if you're lost or found. It just is, the crew chuckled, though the sound was shaky, like a tentative first step on uncertain ground. The tension that had gripped them seemed to relent, replaced by a cautious optimism. So what do we do now, Marin? Arcal asked, his scales shifting to a calmer hue, betraying his newfound confidence. We keep moving forward, Marin replied, her voice steady. We figure out who's behind this mess and make sure they don't try anything else. Sounds like a plan, Mott said, nodding. Though maybe without the mutiny next time. Noted, Marin said with a smile. Though I can't promise anything if you start singing again. As the astral odyssey navigated towards the nebula's edge, the bridge began to take on a sense of normalcy. It was strange, almost surreal, how quickly chaos could morph into routine when you had no other choice. Arcal and HRR now seasoned veterans of the kind of technical wizardry only crises could teach, worked side by side at the consoles. HRR tentacles moved with newfound confidence, while Arcal's scales glimmered with determination. I think I'm getting the hang of this, HRR said, a hint of pride in his voice. Just another day at space school, Arcal replied, his tone light but underpinned with the gravity of what they'd accomplished. Marin watched them with a mix of relief and pride. You two make a good team, she said, her voice warm. Who knew saving a ship could double as extra credit? Riv, ever the joker, chimed in. Hey, as long as I don't have to write an essay on this, I'm good. You're all good, Marin said, catching Mott's eye. The captain nodded, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. They'd done the impossible, but not without leaving a few scars behind. The PA system crackled again, bringing with it a voice that was both familiar and unwelcome. This is Astral Command. We've been monitoring your situation. Stand by for debrief. Marin rolled her eyes. Of course, can't have a cosmic adventure without someone wanting to dissect it. The crew braced themselves for the undoubtedly tedious interrogation that awaited them. But for now, they had a moment to breathe, a moment to reflect on how far they'd come. When they finally reached the edge of the nebula, the ship emerged into open space, the stars twinkling like cosmic breadcrumbs leading them home. It was a sight that should have felt comforting, but instead carried a bittersweet note of unfinished business. Looks like we're not space dust, Riv said, his voice carrying a note of triumphant disbelief. Not yet, Marin replied, though her tone was more hopeful than it had been in a long time. The debrief was as boring as anticipated, a parade of bureaucratic nonsense that Marin tuned out as much as possible. But she couldn't ignore the sense of closure that came with it, a feeling that the worst was behind them. Well, that was enlightening, she said dryly after the final transmission cut off. I'll be sure to file that under things I won't miss. HRR chuckled, the sound a small victory in itself. At least we didn't blow up. A low bar, but I'll take it, Marin replied. With the ship's systems finally stabilizing and their course set for whatever lay beyond the nebula, Marin allowed herself a rare moment of introspection. She thought about how far they'd come, how each of them had grown in the face of adversity. This isn't how I imagined teaching, she admitted to Mott, who was standing beside her, staring out into the vastness of space. Life's full of surprises, Mott replied, his tone surprisingly gentle. But you did good, Marin, really good. Marin smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that felt like a revelation. Thanks, Captain. Looks like you're stuck with us for a while longer. Could be worse, Mott said, his lips twitching into the semblance of a smile. Could be stuck in the mess hall, listening to my own singing. Don't sell yourself short, Marin quipped. I'm sure there's a career in annoying performances waiting for you somewhere. The bridge crew, buoyed by their small victories and the camaraderie born from shared danger, continued to move forward. There was work to be done, mysteries to unravel, and a ship to keep in one piece. As the astral odyssey sailed on, Marin felt a sense of purpose settle over her, tempered by the knowledge that they'd faced the worst the universe could throw at them and come out stronger for it. "We did it, didn't we?" Arkal asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "We did," Marin confirmed, her words a promise as much as a declaration. And as the stars stretched out before them, infinite and unknowable, Marin knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. In the end, that was all that mattered.